We sold your farm. Karen announced like she had already won. I looked at her, then at my land, and calmly asked one question: who gave you the right? The notice claimed my property had been transferred to a development company, but something about the document immediately looked wrong. Karen smiled and told me I had no choice. According to her, the HOA had already made the decision for me. I didn't argue at the gate. I asked for records instead. If the HOA had really sold my farm, there had to be a legal paper trail. The property map showed exactly where my land began and ended, and none of those boundaries included the HOA's claimed ownership. I took every document to a property attorney. He studied the records quietly before finally saying, "Your ownership is much stronger than they realize." The HOA had authority over the neighborhood, but the documents showed they did not own my privately deeded farm. I attended their next meeting with the records in my hand. This time, Karen couldn't simply point at my farm and declare it sold. I showed them the original boundaries and ownership records. The room became strangely quiet as everyone realized the HOA had overreached. Karen changed her argument completely. Now, she claimed the farm should belong to the community because development plans had already been made. They had already planned roads, houses, and landscaping across my fields. They had designed an entire neighborhood on property they didn't own. I personally checked every boundary marker. The survey confirmed what the documents had already told us. We brought in a licensed surveyor to remove every doubt. The official survey placed the farm boundaries exactly where my deed said they were. When Karen saw the survey, she finally stopped smiling. There was no confusing the boundary anymore. We checked the public property records to make absolutely sure. The ownership history was clear, and my farm had never been transferred. Their own records revealed the biggest problem. They had been making development decisions based on property they never owned. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply used the rights available to me as the property owner, and I began exploring a completely legal sale of property I actually owned. A legitimate buyer became interested in the farm. Suddenly, Karen realized that ownership worked both ways. Karen came back demanding that I stop the sale. I simply reminded her that this time, the decision belonged to the actual owner. Word spread through the neighborhood. Homeowners began asking why the board had promised land that was never theirs to sell. For the first time, the homeowners weren't listening to Karen's version alone. They wanted documents, answers, and accountability. The sale moved forward through the proper legal process. Every document was reviewed, every signature was recorded, and everything was above board. Karen could only watch from outside. The farm she had casually claimed was now being transferred through the legal process she had ignored. The new owner had his own plans for property, and unlike the HOA's plan, his decisions were based on actual ownership. Then came the twist Karen never expected. Because the HOA had tangled itself into property agreements it didn't fully understand, several legitimate transactions followed. Months earlier, Kara had laughed and said, "We sold your farm." Now she was standing there realizing that lawful ownership had consequences she never considered. I never needed revenge. I needed the truth, the records, and the law on my side. The biggest lesson was simple. An HOA can make rules, but it can't simply manufacture ownership. And that's how the people who claimed they had sold my farm learned the difference between an HOA rule and actual property ownership. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from.